Welcome to The Real News. I'm Jessel Noor in Baltimore. In breaking news, embattled Baltimore Mayor Catherine Pugh has resigned.
The following is Mayor Pugh's statement. Today, I am submitting my written resignation to the Baltimore City Council. I am sorry for the harm that I have caused to the image of the city of Baltimore and the credibility of the office of the mayor. Baltimore deserves a mayor who can move our great city forward.
Pugh, a Democrat, is facing allegations of corruption for receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporations doing business with the city for her Healthy Holly children's books. Last week, the FBI and IRS raided City Hall and her home. So what comes next? Baltimore doesn't just face a crisis in leadership. The city is rife with inequality, and it's considered one of America's deadliest cities. Is this an opportunity to build a better Baltimore? Joining me to discuss this are three guests. Nabia Aziz, until 2 weeks ago, was the lead organizer on Communities United campaign around Better Budget Baltimore. Amanda DiStefano is a leadership organizer with United Workers. She has worked on 2 ballot initiatives to establish and fund an affordable housing trust fund in Baltimore. And Peter Sabonis is the director of legal strategies at the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative and works with community groups to promote dignity and economic and social rights. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with this breaking news. After a month of being on leave of absence, Mayor Catherine Pugh, just a couple hours ago now, resigned from office. She submitted her resignation. She's done. What's your reaction to that? And let's quickly talk about what her legacy is and what her track record was in office. I know one of the things that we covered closely was the fact that one of her first moves was vetoing a minimum wage bill that she campaigned on, promised to support in office.
Well, I know a lot of people are celebrating, and I have a hard time celebrating how this situation all played out. I think that the pay-to-play politics is something that is, pretty common in Baltimore city government, and it's unfortunate that Mayor Pugh, former Mayor Pugh, as a Black woman, is the person who is now being the poster child for it when we know it happens all the time. So I don't want to celebrate her fall from grace, but I am trying to focus on looking forward to what this means for Baltimore and the things that we can get accomplished with new Mayor Jack Young.
It's certainly a symptomatic of a system that at its root has a number of issues. And you referred to equity issues in this city. And I think she's the product, of a campaign finance system, of a government system that, as you mentioned, rewards pay to play, that requires money every step of the way, and really requires, at least at this point in time, such a tight relationship with the private sector that at times it's indistinguishable between the public and the private sector. And the University of Maryland that was once a public hospital. And now it's private, and it's a bit fitting in this time of privatization that this should take a government official down.
So there's already been calls for reforming Baltimore's strong mayor system. The mayor in Baltimore has some of the strongest powers out of any similar city in the whole country. So on Monday, the city council proposed 4 changes to the city charter, including giving themselves the power to add money to the budget, which currently the mayor controls, and lowering the number of votes needed to override a mayor's veto. Currently, it's 12 of 15 members. They want to change it to 10. I asked Councilman Bill Henry about this and 2 reforms that are currently not on the table, which include participatory budgeting and changes to the Board of Estimate, which is the city's spending board. This was Bill Henry.
Importance of making certain that we have lots of community buy-in in any type of charter change. And so that's one of the reasons why we're going to be encouraging a year-long series of conversations about this. My expectation would be that if this charter amendment passes and the council actually has the ability to move money around in the budget, one of the things that we would have the option to do is create a fund that could be then further distributed in a participatory budgeting fashion. So I do know that at least one, possibly two council people are working on charter amendments related to the Board of Estimates. I know that that's where this gets a little bit trickier, because once you start dealing with the composition or the powers of the Board of Estimates, then you really are starting to get into the fundamentals of the strong mayor system.
So we just covered a lot of ground there. So let's go through it one by one. So one of the major reforms that it's not for the first time has been brought up is the power of the mayor to set the entire city budget. Right now, policing gets over $500 million, which, as we know, is more than goes to schools and to youth and to health services. That is a major issue that I know, Nabiha, you have worked on through your work at Communities United. Talk about why you picked up this fight back in 2018.
So there was a coalition of several different groups who were interested in coming together and trying to make a change in our budget. Communities United was particularly interested in it because we have been working with a report called the Freedom to Thrive report that was written by our national affiliate, the Center for Popular Democracy. It was co-written also with BYP 100 and the Law for Black Lives. And what this report said was, in 2017, Baltimore City outpaced several other similarly sized cities in their per capita police spending. And this is something that, we were not happy to be leading the pack in police spending at the same time when we were fighting to get funding for our schools. So Communities United, when we all came together, we thought that it was really something that was important for us to try to take the lead on.
And so Baltimore spending all this money on policing doesn't seem like they're getting much results from the priorities right now, because we're one of the country's, most dangerous cities, according to a number of statistics and reports.
Absolutely. And so right now, our police spending, for every dollar that we spend on policing, we're spending about 51 cents on Baltimore City Public Schools, 15 cents on the Department of Housing and Community Development, 13 cents on Human Services, 6 cents on the Office of Unemployment Development, and a penny on substance use disorders and mental health from the health department. This part is especially important because we do have a very high homicide rate. In 2017, we had 343 homicides, but in the same year, we had 761 people die from drug or alcohol-related deaths or overdoses. So we have twice as many overdoses as we do homicides, but for every dollar we're spending on policing, we're only spending a penny to solve some of the, to come up with solutions to the opioid epidemic.
And so if this charter amendment goes through, the council has more power. The idea is that they could change some of the priorities. It's important for folks to know that Eric Costello, who chairs the committee in which the charter reforms will go through, has said he's likely won't hold hearings until June of 2020. Peter, can you talk about why this is significant? Because the council is one way we can have reforms to the charter, but there's another way as well. Talk about how the power that people have here should change the charter.
That's right. Any charter amendment needs to go to the voters, okay? But there are two ways it can go to the voters. One is a city council bill, which Bill Henry and the other councilors were referring to. And the other way is a citizen petition. And that citizen petition really requires at least 10,000 signatures by registered voters in the city that express a desire to change the charter, articulate language that amends the charter, and then there's a summary of the language that actually is put on the petition so that every individual who signs a petition can review the summary that the voters will see. But it involves let's just put it this way. I was interested that Bill Henry said, we want a process. I was involved with the Better Budget process, and that was a coalition in which we developed over various versions of a budget. We injected a purpose clause in the budget. We don't have a purpose clause that talked about racial and economic equity. We injected a public process in this language, et cetera. It's interesting that someone who's supposedly devoted to a process, on a long process, quickly just adopts the just language, that amends the charter in a way that doesn't express public participation, doesn't express racial and economic equity, doesn't even express a purpose to the budget. All things that we as citizens were able to hash out and brainstorm about before we settled on a final version. But this is something that we can still do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are talking about that right now, the fact that the people don't need the city council or anyone else. They don't need permission. They can go ahead, they can get those 10,000 signatures, and they can make significant changes to how this city is run and really whose interest it's run for. So Amanda, you worked as an organizer on 2 successful campaigns around affordable housing in the city. Talk about what your experience was, what the challenges were, and how you're able to pull this off.
Sure. So I think that the idea that Councilman Costello raised of not hearing these reform bills until the summer of next year in 2020 really—
To be on the ballot in November.
Exactly. Really poses a question for anybody who would be doing a ballot initiative around these same issues. One of the things that we learned in the first ballot initiative in 2016 to establish the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was that you need to start as early and as soon as possible. Getting 10,000 signatures requires you to talk to at least 50,000 people, just being conservative. And so starting early is super, super important, and also just having a really strong canvassing team, having folks that deeply understand what the change is and are able to explain it is very important. In Baltimore, as we're petitioning, a lot of folks' confidence is very low when you talk about reforming government. There are folks that have seen lots and lots of promises and ideas come by, and execution has often not followed in the way that people would hope. And so I think that another challenge that's really important as you're pursuing a ballot initiative is to have your summary and have your wrap for your canvassers just put in the most simple terms possible. Why is this reform important, and what will it do for you as a citizen of Baltimore? So just for an example, when we started, actually in both ballot initiatives, I think our first question, of course, was, are you registered to vote in Baltimore City? Because unfortunately, if you're not, the canvasser has to just quickly move on to the next person. And speed is really important in your conversations as well. But the second question for us was just, do you think we should have more affordable housing in Baltimore? And so just a very brief kind of question really helps as far as when you're speaking with folks about petitions. I think having something that's very concise is really useful. The other, I guess, challenge really is just the hot, humid summer heat of Baltimore City. It's hard for people to be out in the weather, in crowded places, talking to lots and lots of people for hours at a time. So really being reasonable and setting expectations for canvassers, for volunteers even that are working on ballot initiatives, and making sure that people are staying hydrated, taking good care of themselves.
It gets hot in the summer. It's humid.
It's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it's super important in a democracy. The very, very best way for change to happen is for voters, for the people to decide. And so that takes a lot of work. That's not something that comes easily.
And so Nabiha, you worked on this Better Budget campaign
Yes.
in 2018, and you weren't able to get the 10,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And there was a lot of factors in play here. What did you have to deal with? And you got about 7,000, so you were close, but you didn't quite get 10,000. Talk about what the challenges were.
So there were multiple ballot initiatives that were taking place, and so some people were saying, oh, we already signed it, because the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was doing their second petition as well. We started pretty late.
When did you start?
So when we started, we were about 10 weeks out from our deadline. So we didn't have as much time as we would have liked. The weather was horrible last summer. In addition to the heat, we had a lot of rain. I mean, Artscape, which should have been prime time for collecting signatures, it rained pretty much all of Artscape last year. So, and I guess the biggest thing is this was our first time doing it. It was my first time doing it, and that's a big factor. So there's a learning curve with everything. We got a lot of guidance from Amanda, but they were working on their ballot initiative as well. So she gave us some really great tips. But I think, you know, everything takes practice, and it was a positive experience, no doubt.
And Peter, so you've consulted with different groups that are doing this. You've worked on some of the campaigns. What else do people need to know that are interested in this, and maybe just learning about the fact that people can make serious change in the city, and it's, you know, the clock is already sort of ticking on making this happen?
Yes, I worked on both of these, and the one point that I would add is that the petitions have to be in by mid-August. Okay, so that's when we're talking as early as possible. You know, that's the end of it. The other piece is an interesting, as a lawyer, there's an interesting series of court decisions on charter amendments, and it really the language. One was a rent control attempt in Baltimore, which passed in the 70s. It was taken to court, it was challenged, and the court nullified the people's amendment because the amendment looked too much like a piece of legislation passed by the city council. And what the court said was the people can change the form and structure of government, but the people cannot take away the legislative body's power to legislate. And what you're doing here with this rent control budget petition, which was basically identical to the rent control legislation that had failed in the city council, it was then just put into the charter. The court said that looks, acts, smells like legislation, and you can do a charter amendment, but you have to respect the separation of powers. So the people have a role, but the people's role is not the legislative role. So you have to respect the city council, and you have to limit your charter amendment to the form and structure. We about actually how far you can go, et cetera. And all I can tell you is there's not a bright line, and at times, I think in the past, even with the Housing Trust Fund, there were some of us who felt like, I think we went over the line here. But if no one challenges it, there's not a problem. But that is something that you have to watch out for if you're pushing something that has political forces who can litigate and challenge you.
So we were talking off camera about how there might even be competing ballot initiatives, one from the city council and perhaps even a more progressive ballot initiative, maybe around budgeting. Maybe the city council proposes they have more control of the budgeting, but people come together and say we want participatory budgeting to have that in the charter. So you're going to have potentially competing ballot initiatives. Can you also talk about the importance of educating people and organizing people to make the decision on the ballot in November in 2020?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is if somebody comes to you with a ballot initiative and is asking for your signature, I think you should always sign, because when you sign a petition, you're not saying that you support it or you oppose it. What you're saying is you want an opportunity to participate in the democratic process. You want to get it on the ballot, and then you can make your decision when election season comes around. So that's the first thing. But with anything, voters have to make sure they are educated on the issues, that they go to people who might have more insight to be able to differences are, and at the end of the day, voters have to make the decision that's going to be in their best interest. That's how our process works best.
I personally would be very careful. I think I personally would be really careful about what I signed, because who knows what people are trying to get out there or whatever. But you talk about why you think everyone should sign a ballot initiative to kind of get it on the ballot and let the voters decide.
So I think obviously if someone is giving you a piece of paper and asking you to sign it, you should read it first, but that's why the summary on ballot initiatives are super important. They're usually 3 or 4 bullet points. And so like Nabia said, it's really important though that you're not agreeing in writing at that time that this should happen. You're simply agreeing that the voters get to decide on this. And what I think it would be a really big challenge that I've never seen before is if there were a ballot initiative that came from the council as well as a ballot initiative that came from the people to do a charter amendment on a similar subject, a similar reform. Usually, in my experience with the 2 ballot initiatives that we've done, the heaviest lift is really getting those 10,000 signatures. And once it's on the ballot, we've had signs for Question J, which was creating the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And of course, we had people doing some electioneering at the polls. But I think that level of education for voters would be something that would bring entirely new challenges.
Okay, well, I want to, oh, you have something?
Oh, I was just going to point out that, you know, from this point in August where you deliver the petitions to November, you're entering into a new phase, which is basically your campaign phase. So as Amanda alluded to, you could have a campaign where you have 2 competing ballot initiatives and you are actually emphasizing the people's budget amendment rather than the council's budget amendment, or various ways of presenting your campaign in that short window.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all for joining us in this important discussion. And Amanda Stefano with United Workers worked on 2 successful campaigns around the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Nabia Aziz, you worked on the Communities United campaign to help make the budget more fair in Baltimore. And Peter Sabonis, longtime attorney and activist that's worked on many of these campaigns and obviously have a lot of knowledge about this stuff. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
And thank you for joining us at the Real News Network. And come to our event at Ida B's Table at 6 o'clock on Tuesday. We'll talk more about these issues and what a ballot fight looks like, what the city could look like if the people had more power and more control over this city's future in this very key moment for the future of Baltimore City. Thank you so much for joining us.